Thomas. Hi, everyone. Good to see lots and lots of folk here. Welcome, everyone, to our 71st Reading Online Sport Economics Seminar. This week, we are very happy to have long-time attendee and chair from 2 weeks back, Alex Krumer from Molde University College. He's going to present on fewer teams, more games, evidence from the structural change in basketball's Euroleague. And given there are so many people here desperate to hear Alex's talk, it makes no sense for me to sit here and talk. So I'm just going to hand over to Alex. Please do take away your presentation.
Thank you so much. So let me just share the screen. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yep, excellent. So thank you very much, James, for organizing this very nice seminar that keeps us meeting once a week. And this is my second presentation here. My first presentation was about ski jumping. So I'm a football guy, as you can see, but I like to do things about different sports. And the previous paper was actually published in Scandinavian Journal of Economics very recently. So I hope this paper will also do well. So this is a joint work with Alessandro Di Mattia, who is my PhD student here at Molde University College. So this is his first chapter in his PhD. So congratulate him. I hope it's a nice one, and he's here. In fact, I thought about this idea for a long time, and then there was one presentation here at Roses about basketball, if I'm not mistaken, right? There was one, like there were several, but about attendance, and then Stefan Zimanski said, "It is too bad we don't have papers on European basketball." So Stefan, this one is for you. Okay. So, fewer teams, more games, that's the title, evidence from the structural change in basketball's Euroleague. We economists, we like changes because we can test different things. So let's go. But we start actually with football. And in April 2021, when the COVID pandemic was still at its peak, the headlines of more or less all the leading newspapers in Europe spoke only about the earthquake in the European football. If you remember, the Super League that lived only for 3 days or even less, everybody spoke about it. So what was the story with this Super League? I guess most of you know it. The idea was to create a new closed league with something like 20 or 15, 20 teams. Now, and the promoters of this idea, they justified it by the increased number of games between high quality teams. And those teams will have a secure spot in the tournament for many years. Now, very recently, I think 2 weeks ago, there were lots of talks about the willingness of FIFA to have World Cups every 2 years instead of every 4 years. And they again justified by the thing that, well, we will have more games between high quality teams, therefore people would like it, and then why not? But I'm an economist, and we have different models, different theories. For example, according to the basic economic theory, and I always like to go back to the basics, we have the so-called indifference curves. So in these indifference curves, they represent the combination of goods that provide the consumer with the same level of satisfaction, and they are downward sloping. So every textbook in economics, for example, this one that Pindyk and Rubenfeld, so they speak about it. This is one of the basic models in economics. But what does it mean? This means that an increase in consumption of one good should decrease the consumption of another one. Super basic. And another basic thing is that there is a diminishing marginal rate of substitution, the so-called MRS, between the goods. So the more we consume of one good, the less we are ready to give up from another one. And for those of you who don't remember what is indifference curve, though I'm not sure that there are such people here. So this is indifference curve. For example, we have stadium attendance as one good, and the other good is all the other leisure activities. And this is how it looks like. If you want to increase stadium attendance, you have to give up something else. Now, and here we go to Florentino Perez, the president of Real Madrid, and he has already said something like this. Football has to change and adapt. We have to analyze why young people, 16 to 24 years old, 40% of them aren't interested in football. Why is that? Because there are a lot of low quality games and that's the most important here, they have other entertainment platforms. And I remember during European Championship, my kids, and I was very much surprised, they didn't want to watch European Championship because they wanted to see live on YouTube some e-games. And I said, what the heck? Why? This is once in 4 years, the best teams play. And then I saw many millions of people online, kids 8 years old, 10 years old, 14 years old. They are not into football. They are into something else. So this indifference curve, probably an important one for attendance, for sports in general. I wasn't that enthusiastic about this project before I started to think about those basic ideas in economics. And I think sports, we are in a very difficult situation now with regard to sports because there are so many opportunities to spend time in other things rather than watching or attending sports games. Okay, so what are we doing here? We investigate whether an increased frequency of games between high quality teams would indeed increase stadium attendance demand, because all those promoters of Super League, more frequent World Cups, they say more games, more attend or more interest. Okay, more games among high quality teams would increase attendance. So, but it's very difficult to study such a thing. But luckily, there was a change in Euroleague, which is a basketball competition. So we take advantage of a recent change that occurred in the basketball Euroleague. And this is the most prestigious tournament among European teams. This is kind of the Champions League of basketball. Yeah, so in 2016-17 season, the Euroleague reduced the number of participating teams from 24 to 16 and increased the number of each team's games in its round-robin tournament by 25%. So they said, we don't want all those weak teams. Let's have only the best teams. So they reduced the number, and then each team played more games. So this is more or less the story of the Super League or the frequent number of World Cups. So what actually happened? So a little bit about the tournament design before and after the change. Before the change, there were two stages in this tournament. The first stage, which we can see in figure 1A, that was the so-called regular season. There were 24 teams, 4 groups of 6 teams each. Then they play a double round robin at home and away, the usual one. And then the top 4 teams from each group advance for the top 16 tournament. And the bottom 2 teams, they relegate to a lower league, to the so-called Europa League, or Europe Cup in basketball. Then in the second stage of the tournament, there are those 16 teams that advanced for the second stage. They play in 2 groups of 8 teams in a group. So each team plays 14 games, home and away against each other, the usual round robin. Then the top 4 advance for the quarterfinals, which is an elimination stage. The top 2 have home advantage because they play best of 5 games. So those who finish the round robin in the first or second place, they have the possibility to play 3 games at home. And the weaker team, a team that finished in the 3rd and 4th positions, they can only play twice at home. After the change, as I said, there are only 16 teams, 1 long round-robin tournament of 30 games. Each team plays against each other, 2 games per each pair, once at home, once away. The top 8, after the end of the tournament, advance for the quarterfinals, such that the top 4 have home advantage. They may play 3 times at home. And the teams ranked from 5th to 8th, they can only play twice at home in the quarterfinals. And quarterfinals are the same before and after the change. So that's more or less the story before and after. Okay, so let's talk a bit about what this paper can, what literature can be related to this paper. So first of all, it's the literature on time allocation. There are two really great papers. The first is, which is underestimated, undercited in my view. Mincer in 1962 considered a married women's time trade-off between housework and paid work, and the well-known model is by Becker, who emphasized the idea that there are many different types of time used that combine into a single objective function with a single overall budget constraint. So that's more or less the story there. And later, those ideas on time limitation, time allocation, have been used in the context of demand to sport or demand to leisure. And there are many papers that spoke about it. This is just a limited number of papers that I cite here. In addition, of course, naturally, this paper relates to the literature on attendance demand. And in that regard, I highly recommend you to read the recent review by Dominic Schreier and his co-author Ansari. I'm sorry, I don't remember his first name. They published a very, very good review in Journal of Sports Economics on attendance demand, where they noted a notable absence of research on minor leagues as well as on minor sports. So attendance demand mostly relates to traditionally major football leagues such as English Premier League, Spanish La Liga, French League, German Bundesliga, and Italia Serie A, and of course North American sports. I guess in the audience there are so many people who wrote about attendance demand, so I apologize for not citing all the papers because this literature is really growing very fast. And however, there is only a handful of papers that investigate attendance demand in minor football leagues. So there is a paper about Peruvian football, about Austrian and Swiss league. I wrote recently about Norwegian league. There are also papers I saw about Scottish league, Irish league, but not in that this amounts. And about less popular sports, there are not many papers at all. For example, I can remember a paper on Danish handball league that was published by Storm and colleagues in European Sport Management Quarterly. And to the best of our knowledge, as far as we know, and I was very much surprised, there are no previous studies on attendance demand in the basketball's Euroleague. And this is really surprising because, for example, according to Wikipedia, and they have many references there, the Euroleague's attendance is the 5th highest of any professional indoor sport league in the world. And this is the highest outside the United States. And the 2nd highest of any professional basketball league in the world, only behind the NBA. And there are no papers about attendance in Euroleague. So I guess we fill this gap with our paper. And the third trend in the literature that we'd like to address is OR, operational research. The point is we investigate round robin, and OR literature has intensively investigated different issues of round robin structures that include, but not limited to, balanced distribution of home and away games, break optimization, assignment of referees, number of prizes, traveling distance, and so on and so on, minimizing the breaks. But as far as I know, there are only several papers in the OR literature that dealt with attendance demand. So the first is by Tunde, David, and Rob. They published in 2008 about determinants of the English football. We also, me and Daniel Goller, we published last year a study on the effect of non-frequent days in the top 4 European leagues, where we show that days may affect attendance. And a very recent paper by Tunde and co-authors in European Journal of Operational Research, they actually studied televised audience in the English Premier League when they highlighted many things, among them the importance of the end of season games. One of the things they did many. So let's talk a bit about the Euroleague, because I think many of you are not really familiar with that. So, as I said, the Euroleague is a European basketball club competition played annually between the top tier teams in Europe, something that can be like the Champions League of basketball. This is the Euroleague. It started as a FIBA European Champions Cup. FIBA is the kind of FIFA or UEFA in football. So this is an international basketball federation that governs international basketball competitions around the world. The tournament changed its name in 1996. It became Euroleague. FIBA still organized it. But what FIBA did, they changed the name, but they never trademarked it. And then in 2000, 2001, there is another organization in basketball called ULEB. So they said, seems to be a nice name for a tournament. We take this name because there is no trademark. So they organized the tournament called Euroleague. They took it from FIBA. And then FIBA organized its own tournament called Super League. So there were two Champions League in this season, which was very much confusing. By the way, I have to tell you, Maccabi Tel Aviv, my basketball team, won the Super League, which was very nice. But anyway, it only exists for 1 year, this Super League, and then FIBA gave up. Starting from 2001 and 2, the two organizations agreed that the ULEB would run the Euroleague, and starting from one season later, also the so-called Euro Cup, which is the second largest club competition, like Champions League and Europa League, are run by ULEB. FIBA, on the other hand, they are responsible for the organization of the national teams competitions, such as World and European Championships, as well as the Olympic Games, and some lower tier club tournaments. So there was peace between these two organizations up to 2015. And then in 2015, FIBA tried to regain control of the top tier club competition by introducing the Basketball Champions League. But there was no big success in that. And in November 2015, EuroLeague Basketball SL, this is the company, EuroLeague Basketball SL, that operates the EuroLeague. They agreed the most lucrative deal in the history of the European basketball establishing itself. Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you. Was there...
Alex.
Yeah.
Hearing you. Vinker lite folk.
Is there any question?
No.
Hvordan har forholdet til spillteori?
Shetil, you are mute yourself, Shetil. Okay, now good.
Team.
Mye arbeid med kropper.
We have here some local colleagues that don't know how to mute Teams. Okay, that's good. Now they do. Anyway, so starting from 2015, EuroLeague signed a 10-year joint venture with one of the biggest sport marketing companies, IMG. Okay. So, and then starting from 2016-17, the number of participating teams was reduced from 24 to 16. Then 11 teams are labeled as licensed clubs, like franchise, with a license for 10 years. So regardless of their performance, they still participate. The other 5 spots are given based on different criteria, such as wildcard, which was given to one Turkish team. Then the winner of the previous season's Euro Cup participates in EuroLeague. It's similarly to Champions League and Europa League. And then the other teams were from highest non-licensed placed teams from different leagues, such as Adriatic League, VTB, which is an international tournament in post-Soviet countries, the German Bundesliga, and the Spanish League. Okay, so what do we have in terms of data? So we have all the games in EuroLeague's regular season, the first stage, and top 16, the second stage before the change, and the regular season after the change for 6 seasons. So the reason for the selected period is because 2019-20 was suspended due to the COVID-19 outbreak, so we didn't take it. So our data consists of the 3 seasons before and 3 seasons after the structural change. that appeared in 2016-17 season. Now, the idea is that we compare the games of the same teams that played before and after. So there were 938 such games in which both teams participated at least in one season before and one season after the change. After that, so I'm very careful with data, we removed several games that were played behind closed doors due to fans' misconduct. Then we followed the idea that we presented in our paper with Daniel Goller in European Journal of Operational Research, where we showed that non-frequent days, they differ in terms of attendance. So we can see that there were not even a single Sunday or Monday game after the change. Therefore, we removed several games on Sunday and Monday. And those are the 19 teams that participated both before and after the change. If we only compare attendance, like simple attendance, we can see that out of 19 teams, only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, only 6 teams increased attendance after the change compared to the top 16 before the change. If we look at share of the stadium capacity, then we can see that because teams also changed stadiums during the year, so during the different stages of the tournament. So there are 4 teams that increased the share of capacity after the change compared to the top 16 before the change. This is the descriptive statistics in our data set. We can see that attendance in top 16 was higher than after the change. We can also see that the share of capacity was the lowest after the change. And other important things, we see that probably something happened with the games on public TV. And what happened, in fact, that public TV reduced its exposure after the change. Probably private channels bought TV rights for these games. I will return to this thing after. And we have different additional variables. Just to make it more visually attractive, let's say, or easier to see, this is attendance at different stages of the Euroleague. We can see that top 16 before the change had the highest attendance. But when we look at the share of the stadium capacity, we can see that the regular season after the change had the lowest capacity. Okay. Any questions so far? No questions. Okay. So what we are doing, we want to understand what was the effect of this structural change in the Euroleague on attendance. Now, a naive approach of correlating a dummy variable of playing after the change with attendance will yield biased and inconsistent estimates because teams' ongoing tournaments achievements, as well as the team's stadium, may differ between the cases. On top of it, individual teams' unobserved characteristics, like fans or something like that, or historical rivalries between the teams, are likely to affect the demand. So we need to take the different sources of unobserved heterogeneity into account. Now, our panel data follows the same teams over time, which allows us controlling for time invariant differences between the teams. So this is what we do. We run this regression where we have 2 outcome variables, either LAN attendance, which is widely used in the literature, and share of capacity, which I personally like very much. Then we have regular before. This is a dummy variable that receives the value of 1 if a game is played during the regular season before the change. Top 16, this is a dummy for the top 16 before the change, which means that our reference group is a regular season after the change. We also use home team and away team dummies. Our set of controls includes teams' win percentage before the respective game, whether a team has already qualified for the next round, lost any chance to do so, whether a team has secured home advantage in quarterfinals. If you remember, I showed you that it is important to finish in the first or second place in top 16 or in the top 4 places after the change, because you secure home advantage in quarterfinals. So this may affect the attendance. Of course, we use big days, and whether a game is in the first round of the season or not, which is based on the finding of an old paper from 1998 that showed that first games are very important in American sport, which attracts a significantly larger amount of fans. Now, one additional issue can be is that we have capacity constraints, and then we need to use Tobit estimator. In our case, the percentage of sold out games varies between 15 to 20%. And given that we use Team's fixed effect, the possible problem with Tobit estimator is that it may lead to an incidental parameters problem unless T is large. The number of periods per team is large. Now we go to the literature in econometrics. There is a very nice paper by Green in 2004, and he showed that slopes of the Tobit estimator seem not to be biased. Used the Monte Carlo methods, and then he saw that the slopes are not biased, but the variance of this estimator was biased. Nevertheless, the bias diminished fairly rapidly with the increase in T, and he used maximal number of 20. In our case, we have 19 teams with on average 59 games per each team, so we believe that the bias is not a big concern in our setting. Okay, so these are the results. So first of all, we see that when we compare regular season before the change with the regular season after the change, we see no significant difference between those two periods. However, in top 16, we find close to 9 or even more than 9% larger attendance in top 16 compared to games after the change. Here we can see some other nice results. First round of the season attracts larger attendance, and so on and so on. Now, again, as I'm a big fan of this scheduling and the days of the week because they may affect attendance, we can see that Wednesday and Tuesdays, because we already removed Sundays and Mondays, but we can see that Wednesdays and Tuesdays were not very frequent before the change. Therefore, we removed all the games also on Wednesdays and Tuesdays. And this is what we see. So when using only Thursdays and Fridays, which are the most frequent days in the Euroleague, as we can see both before and after, we can see that our results more or less the same when using only Thursdays and Fridays. Then we said, okay, but what really drives the whole reduction? And given that the season after the changes is relatively long with 30 games compared to 10 games in regular season before plus 14 games in the top 16 before, we said, let's only compare first 14 rounds before and after the change. Or we took 10 games in regular season before plus 14 games or 14 rounds in the top 16 before and compared it to the 14 rounds in the in Euroleague after the change. And we can see that in top 16, the attendance demand grew by more than 13%, which in a way makes sense because the games in the beginning of a long season may be perceived as less attractive because there is still time to fix the problems and there is still time for really crucial games. When we compared, then we said, okay, now let's compare all the games before the change with the last 14 games after the change. But then we said, okay, if we only compare the last 14 games after the change, we get rid of round 1, and round 1 is a very important game because much more there is a significantly larger attendance, so it wouldn't be a fair comparison. So after the change, we took round 1 and the last 13 rounds, and then we see we still see a positive coefficient, but this is not statistically significant at conventional levels. So we really see that there is no significant difference between attendance before and after the change, which may suggest that the driver of the effect is the tournament design. Too many games or such a long season is not very attractive in the eyes of the fans. Then we did the same thing with share of capacity as an outcome variable. We see more or less the same story here, no real change. Then we said, okay, but here we don't control for TV, because maybe what happened is that people watch more or less games on TV, and therefore that's what drives the effect. The problem with that is that we can see that public TV is a bad control, because this is an outcome variable by itself. There was a huge change, a very significant change in exposure of public TV games before and after the change, because many private channels in different countries bought those games. In addition, one other, we also tested whether home advantage differs between before and after, or maybe the score difference differ. We don't find any differences in terms of competitive balance or home advantage. But we can see that public TV is an outcome variable, which means that this is a bad control. We nevertheless said, okay, even if it's a bad control and it's not clear that we should do it, we still control for public TV. We see that public TV has no effect whatsoever on attendance demand, and our main results are robust to inclusion of public TV, which means that the reduction of in attendance is actually not really associated with attendance with public TV. Okay. Now, okay. And we did the same with the share of capacity, and we see more or less the same story. Public TV is not significant, and we see larger attendance in top 16 compared to after the change, and no difference between regular season before and after the change. By the way, this non-significant result between regular season before and after the change is in a way encouraging, because one possible concern is that there is some trend, some negative trend in the interest of basketball fans over the years, and maybe there is some trend that we don't see. If this was the case, then we would have seen also a significant result for regular season before, and also a significant result for the last rounds. But probably this is not the case. Probably what drives our results is actually the tournament design itself. Too many games. Okay. So that was these were the results. So this paper, we will conclude now. This paper was motivated by the question of whether an increased number of top-tier clashes between a limited number of high-quality teams would increase attendance demand, as suggested by many promoters of these new leagues. Our results on reduced attendance in the basketball's Euroleague are in line with the economic theory, according to which the already large supply of leisure, along with the diminishing marginal utility and the time constraints of the consumers, should actually decrease the willingness to attend more games. We have lots of opportunities to spend our time on different leisure activities. We are already in a huge amount of sports that is broadcast. It's not like in 80s, when we only had like one game per week, and I was waiting for these European Cups. I was waiting for those Wednesday games, and but now every day we have so many games. Now, one thing it's important to mention: we found a decreased attendance per game, but the aggregate attendance still increased because each team played 25% more games. But the decrease per game was less than 25%. So overall, people attend more games, but per game, less per game. But this actually means, or this may suggest, that such an increase may have an effect on attendance in domestic leagues. Therefore, we call for additional research on the effect of the change in the Euroleague format on attendance in domestic leagues of the participating teams. or even of the participating team itself. Let's say Maccabi Tel Aviv in Europe and Maccabi Tel Aviv in Israel, for example. Now, I started with football, but still there are lots of differences between football and basketball. It's not the same. It's not as popular as football, and therefore there can be many differences. Still, the results of our paper may be of interest to the decision makers in football that consider the increase in frequency of games between high quality teams. I just want to remind you that there were 2 seasons in Champions League with 2 group stages, and very fast they understood that this is not interesting. Too many group stages, it's not interesting, and they understood it in football like 20 years ago. So any additional change should take into account the tournament design that play a very important role in attendance demand. And finally, I guess, and again, during the writing process, I realized how deep is the challenge, how huge is the challenge of sports authorities because of the competition with other sports, because of the competition within the sport, because of the competition with other leisure activities. So in the long term, different federations, football, basketball, and many others, they may consider drastic changes. For example, duration of a single game. We already know that FIFA considers this, changing the duration of a game from 90 minutes to 60 minute net time. And I go back to Florentino Perez. He said the following: it's reality. They, and he means young people, say the games are too long. We have to change something. If we want football to stay alive, sometimes we don't understand our children or grandchildren. There are different generations. The world changes. If young people don't watch an entire game, it's because it's not interesting enough, or we'll have to shorten the game. So there are talks about it already, and I think we will be there at some point. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. Finishing on a controversial point as well, the idea of shortening games. Jorge has a comment in the chat. Is it possible that the results are driven by households' budget constraints instead? Maybe more games are just too expensive for the average fan, not a lack of interest.
This could be, but yeah, we didn't have the prices for the seasonal ticket or for a single game. Yeah, that could be as well. But then I would guess that we have no difference in the regular season before and after. So in that regard, but we have. So if that was the story, then we would have also lower attendance after compared to the regular season before, isn't it? I guess. I don't know.
I'll let Jorge get back to you. In the meantime, Stefan raced to get his hand up, so we should let Stefan ask his question.
Hi, Alex. Well, I normally prefer to wait until the end, but since you cited me in the introduction as being the cause of this paper, I clearly had to jump in right at the beginning. It is great to see papers on basketball, and there should be more European basketball. I think, which is really interesting. Although what I'd really like to see is a history of European basketball from 1950. So all the stuff that's happened since 2000, I think most of us probably well aware. But I've always been fascinated. What happened to basketball? How did basketball evolve in Europe in the 50s, 60s, and 70s? Because it was clearly significant, but it clearly didn't evolve along the lines of the NBA, when it's not obvious why it couldn't have done so. Anyway, more on the point of your paper, you're making some very strong arguments here based on the data, and I'm worried about a number of confounders that might be interfering with this. So I'm not an expert, but there were several other things that changed around the time of the introduction of this new competition format. So it was a major dispute between FIBA and the Euroleague, right? And FIBA were actually trying to take over the Euroleague competition and actually threatened to expel all of the clubs that were continued to participate in the old Euroleague, they wanted to take it over. And there were various long discussions about sanctions. The dispute rolled on for quite a while. And then FIBA backed down and introduced the Basketball Super Champions League, which is a new competition, which obviously increases the supply of top quality of games between top quality teams. So all of that seems to me, any one of those factors could have significantly affected the level of attendance at EuroLeague games. And so to ignore that and, I think is just, it's really missing, a major point. And just another point I make about your conclusion. So firstly, I mean, let's all agree that we don't want to place very much weight on anything Florentino Perez ever said, because well, he's not a good faith actor. So let's just put it that way. And secondly, even if you say that the kids are not interested in watching long games, and I'm sure that is true, and that story seems to come over again and again. Nonetheless, soccer, football has never been more popular than it is today. It's never made more money than it does today. So to say that this is a sport that's in crisis seems to me to be, I'm always concerned with the if it ain't broke, don't fix it issue. And I mean, it strikes me that I'd be very cautious about interfering with the structure of the game just on the say-so of a few people with a vested power interest in ruling this, taking control. So that's my two pennyworth.
So in fact, thank you very much, Stefan. In fact, you had two points. One, there are some missing things in basketball, and second, don't fix it if it's ain't broken. So I will address both. So the first thing about Champions Basketball League, I have no clue even which team participate there. To claim that this is a very strong competition, no chance. Second, we compared the same teams who competed before and after the change with the same crowd. They don't. Let's say in Israel, for example, Maccabi Tel Aviv, when Hapoel Jerusalem won the ULEP Cup, they even there was a song, "What is ULEP Cup?" So nobody cared about the other competition. Okay. Third, if this was the case, then I would see a decreased attendance also in the last 14 games. 14 games before and 14 games after when we compare, but there was no significant difference there. Also, there was no significant difference between the first stage of the tournament and the after the change. So it seems that the top 16 is much more interesting than the big round robin of 30 games per team. That's kind of the thing. The second thing about if it's ain't broken, don't fix it if it's ain't broken, I'm not sure I agree with you again. Now, the point is that the last European Championship, that with 24 teams, I think it was the lowest ratings ever of the European Championships, if I'm not mistaken, in the group stage. Really bad ratings, TV ratings. So, and with regard to Florentino Perez,
highest ever social media ratings as well, remember.
Yeah. So Florentino Perez think, well, if he says something that makes sense, why not citing him?
Any comeback, Stefan? Or are you happy with that?
Yeah, well, we could go on about this for a long time. I mean, I think partly, one of the issues I have with this also is to compare EuroLeague basketball, which is no doubt very popular with a significant, with a basketball fan base, which is fairly small in Europe relative to the global fan base in soccer, and then say, this shows that people don't want to see Real Madrid play Chelsea more often or Bayern Munich play Liverpool. Again, that's a fairly strong argument. Go back to your indifference curve argument. your indifference curve analysis firstly, you need to include a budget constraint in your indifference curve analysis to demonstrate anything. And the point about the budget constraint in professional sports is that the budget constraint is constrained artificially by the rules of the league. So there are certain options that just aren't available at any point in time, given the structure of the rules. And when the budget constraint is constrained in the way that it is, the normal arguments about indifference curves in free markets don't really apply. And so it could go either way. So again, I think that indifference curve argument is slightly misleading because you're talking as if it was an unconstrained market where it just obviously isn't. Clubs can't cross borders to play each other very easily. There are massive constraints, and would be even with a Super League, right?
Yeah, finally, I agree with you about the indifference curve. That's right. We don't write it in the paper here. We just wanted to show the main idea. If you want to increase something, you have to decrease something else. That's the only thing I wanted to say. But again, and the second thing, I never claimed that you can go from basketball to football. Moreover, I explicitly say that, look, guys, this is only basketball and there are many, many differences. I implicitly say that, well, maybe, but implicitly, not explicitly.
Thanks, Alex. Now, Juan de Diaz has sat waiting with his hand up for a very long time. So, Juan de Diaz, please ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to listen such an interesting presentation. I really love basketball, European basketball, and I love this type of analysis because it will help me a lot in many conversations I have with friends. I won't monopolize the debate, so I just make a quick question that is a kind of criticism that I understand the way the model is developed, but your counterfactual is the match before the creation of the European League. The right counterfactual should be an imaginary counterfactual that would be the same match in an imaginary situation this year without the Super League. So this imaginary counterfactual is something that you don't have. I don't know how you can solve this problem, but one way, I don't know if this is difficult or not, is to look at another sport. For example, handball, that in Spain it was very similar to basketball, and see the evolution of handball or volleyball or any other sport if it resemble the same evolution as in basketball. This will help you to see this. Okay, basketball, the demand for attendance in basketball decreased, but probably not so much like in other sports. And probably this is a good situation, and it's something that indicates that the new tournament had a positive impact.
Thank you very much. That's a very good comment. In fact, when you were talking about it, I thought maybe we should take also the quarterfinals after the change and compare between them and see whether there was change in attendance in the playoffs in basketball. Because handball, I think there was also some changes, but I'm not sure. I'm not a big fan of basketball because Israel is not so good in the handball. We are good at basketball. But comparing the quarterfinals, the attendance in quarterfinal before and after, maybe that could be possible solution. Do you agree with me?
Quarterfinal before and after.
Yes. So to see whether there was a change in attendance.
Why is that a counterfactual of what would have happened? I don't see it.
For example, if there is a negative trend overall, like Stefan says that, well, there was this fights between FIBA and ULEB, and therefore overall people are not very happy with this EuroLeague. Then if they are not happy, maybe they are not happy also in the quarterfinals, and not only in the regular season, for example. And if this is the same, then the story is tournament design.
Okay.
We don't have to agree, Stefan, about everything.
Okay, more questions and comments. David.
Thank you very much, Alex, for your usual slick and interesting contribution. As I understand it, the idea of a super league in any sport, when you form it, is first of all, by having a smaller number of elite teams, you get rid of matches which feature low market teams, and that will boost aggregate attendance. And second, you increase overall quality of play. And I wonder the extent to which the regressions capture these two factors. Essentially, with home and away fixed effects, you're controlling for one particular team playing another particular team. But the whole idea is that you get rid of matches between unpopular teams. So the regressions might not show some of the benefit. The other issue is on the quality of play will on average be higher with a more elite league. Now, I noted that you had in the regressions the current win percent of the teams, but after the change, given it's a more elite league, a given percentage win rate will indicate stronger quality for a team than it did before. And I noticed that the coefficient estimates were going up in the before and after periods, suggesting that attendance did take this into account, because a given increase in win percent was rewarded with bigger increase in attendance after the changes rather than before the changes. So those are just some comments about what I regard as the whole idea of super leagues. Just one supplementary, which is, as I understand it, the pay TV variable, the public TV variable, was about the effect on individual matches. A difficulty in comparing before and after is that removing the tournament essentially from free television may change the whole interest in and popularity of the games. So the effect of the television arrangements may not be so much on individual attendance as on attendance across the whole competition.
Okay, David, thank you very much for your comments. So first of all, still, it is important to say that what we find is that in the last 14 rounds or 13 rounds after the change, there is no difference between before and after the change in all the structures. Regular season, top 16, after the change, no difference. The main difference is in the beginning of the season. The first 14 rounds, they drive the whole thing. After the change, it's not like that. It's like in your recent paper in j.j.reade, where you show this figure on Liverpool and Manchester United, if I'm not mistaken. You have this figure where you show that towards the end of the season that the viewership goes up, right? That's kind of the thing. That's more or less the idea, more or less on the same story. Now, another thing with public TV. So you said that, yeah, again, if there was some external things going on, I would see significant change everywhere, but I don't see it. I only see it in top 16 in the first 14 games. All the rest kind of disappears. They're the same. So that what I think that suggests that the tournament design itself played a role here. Okay. Any other?
Okay. Thanks,
comments?
David. We've got Thomas has also got his hand up.
Hey, Alex. I have a sort of, I'm not a big connoisseur of European basketball in general, I would say. So what interests me a lot is this idea of having this rival league coming up, and then there's this battle out. And so what are your views on this? Is this a natural monopoly, or is this because your paper mostly looks at sort of takes it as a given, I would almost say, that there is one top league, but there was a time when this was not settled who would be this top league, right? So can you explain to me how that worked out? Because I don't know, and I'm just interested.
In that regard, what happened up to 2000, it was run by FIBA, like UEFA, okay? The Champions Cup. Moreover, in 96, they called it Euroleague, or Champions League, right? The same was in UEFA, Champions Cup, then Champions League. But in UEFA, I think they trademarked the name, and that's it. FIBA called it Euroleague without trademarking it, and then in 2000, ULEB, the other organization, which is let's say organization of the club in European football, we have this club organization, right? Something I don't remember the title of it. And they said, okay, we will organize it by ourselves. And in 2000, they attracted most of the teams to the new Euroleague, and the teams that remained with the FIBA, they played in the Super League. So most of the teams were in Euroleague. It was only for one season. After that, all the teams moved to Euroleague, so FIBA kind of gave up. And then ULEB ran this Euroleague competition from 2001-2 up to these days. It had different structures, different tournament designs. Recently, it was like before the change, it had 24 teams, when most like 11 teams had the franchise and all the others according to some merits. And then 3 years ago, they just changed it and said, okay, only 16 teams, one big round robin tournament.
Okay, because the whole, I mean, there's now a battle at the European Court of Justice, of course, and it's really about that UEFA has an amendment saying you cannot have a game between teams across borders in Europe without our prior agreement, right? So this was not the case in basketball then.
No.
Because so they really screwed up the writing of the.
Yeah, because FIBA was UEFA and ULEB were the private guys.
But FIBA did not have, because I wonder why isn't this court battle fought out back then?
I guess basketball, and in that regard, Stefan is entirely right. Basketball is not football. Probably there were not too many people that wanted to jump into this thing, and then because basketball wasn't rich enough in 90s, and clubs barely made it to finish the season probably, and then the ULEB said, okay, let's develop, let's see how it go, what may happen. I don't know. This is what happened. I'm not a big historian here, but as far as I remember, there were not really big clashes between FIBA and ULEB. A bit, but for one season, that's it.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Thomas. Any more questions and comments? Looks like it might be a no. So thank you, Alex, for a very interesting talk, our second talk in a row on basketball, and our first talk on European basketball as well. So thank you very much for that. Next week, we return on October the 15th, and we have Francesco Principe from the University of Padua presenting on racial bias in newspaper ratings of professional football players. So we return back to football next week after a couple of weeks on basketball. But thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. It's been great to see everybody, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.